vị trí phỏa cái màu trắng trắng này, đấy xong rồi mình áp cái map mình to noi thì vào, xong rồi map đấy áp vào cái button của cái button này áp vào cái cái của đây mà nó chỉ là quay của mình được thôi, chứ không thể hiện nó hết bản lệ nữa.
Is there any questions, or are they just discussing it? A map, so say instead of creating a second UV channel, sometimes it might be more ideal to use geometry like that. It's just another way to do it.
Thay vì phải làm cái UV mới nữa dành cho cái đường hoa văn mình làm ra, thì đây là cái cách khác để làm nó hiệu ứng như nhau, thì mọi người cũng làm nào.
It's an alternative.
Đó là cách khác.
All right. So let's talk about textures. We've all seen this one. Okay. So let's talk about how we would create something a little bit more reasonable than this. I want everyone to realize when you copy an image from a web browser and paste it into Photoshop, the color can change. I'm not sure if this one actually will. Yep.
Khi mà mình copy ảnh từ trên web và paste một đoạn sang Photoshop thì màu sắc nó sẽ thay đổi.
If you drag images from our site now, they have WebP format. The only thing you have to do to be able to open these in Photoshop is to install just a simple plugin, and I can send instructions on how to do that.
Bây giờ nếu mà test với copy với drag cái ảnh trực tiếp của mình thì nó sẽ test với dạng copy, mình sẽ cần nó copy bạn sẽ đưa cho mình sau.
So you can see like some differences, just some are a lot more extreme than others, so just be aware of it. If you are creating a texture, copying and pasting in here is fine. Just keep in mind you might need to color correct. So for this one, it actually is a pretty big image. It's 4800 by 38 or 3485. That's enough resolution to work with. The other image that was in the carousel actually is not as high resolution. So since this is the environmental, I would color correct from this, but work with the texture from this image. Another thing with this image is I really only want to work with the front because the back is a little bit more out of focus. If you compare between the two, like these areas aren't as sharp as some of these areas. So I'm going to cut apart the front here and start creating a basic texture. Just keep creating selections from the main image and pasting them onto new layers, and that's what we're going to work from to create our texture sheet. I'll get this started showing some of the techniques that I do, but then I'm going to show you what the final result looked like after about 10 minutes of work. What I like to do is flip things horizontally and vertically so that I don't get that repeated pattern. And it will start to create like different segments of boards. If I need to, I can use the spot healing tool to just select a couple knots and remove them to create a more random pattern instead of having everything repeat so much. If I have problems with light in dark areas, I'll change to the dodge and burn tool. I usually set the exposure somewhere around 10 because anything higher, where like default of set 50, is way too much. So I'm just starting to merge my pieces together, and I can actually paint out some areas and make sure that they're a little bit more consistent with color. It's subtle, but it makes a difference, especially in areas like this. I'm going to work on this in sections. So what I want to do is actually create like a full section of this one piece, this area, and then I'll create another section of the top and bottom pieces so I start to get variation. This will allow me to use like one big texture to place my UVs where I feel like they should be for each section of the bed. If I ever need to blend things a little bit better, I'll just take a little bit off of the top edge using the eraser tool. You can also use masks for this, but this is pretty quick and we want to make sure that it's just something that doesn't take a long time. We just kind of go through and start to blend things together. As you can see, this area is pretty light compared to this side. So that's where I would use my burn tool and just blend them a little bit better together. For this, I have a detail right in the middle. So what I'm going to want to do, instead of flipping horizontally and vertically, which really isn't going to get rid of it anymore, I'm going to move this to the side, then I'm going to duplicate it over again, and then blend them somewhere in the middle.
chỉ lay hai cái màn nhá.
Okay. Same thing with these over here. I'm going to make these longer. And try and match them up as best as I can. Now I have a much longer piece and I can always go in with the spot healing brush and just adjust some of the areas so that they are not as consistent and we don't see that repeating pattern. We're not that far from completion right now, but in the end, we look something like after it's been color corrected to the other image and everything, we look something like, oh, that's not right. It's the wrong one. That's not it either. What is this? Nope. 56, 56. Where did I save this thing? Ah, there it is. Sorry. I was working on a different version too. So in the end, we took this and ended up with something like this. It has just the right amount of detail in it. And we have these pieces to work with our UVs and adjust them. The only other thing, go ahead, sorry. What? Let me just save this image out. To color correct, I want to grab something with mid values, and I'm going to copy it over to my other image. You guys already know how to do this part, but I'll do it anyways. Match color, source, and then layer 8. Okay, so now we have our texture. The only thing I really want to do is to sharpen it a little bit. There's a couple ways you could do this. I need to duplicate my layer. I prefer to use high pass. I need to desaturate it. I like high pass because I can really visualize like what detail is going to be sharpened based off of how I adjust this radius. If I set it to overlay, we can see the difference. If I need more, all I have to do is duplicate the layer. So this is my diffuse. So let's create a normal map for this real quick. I'm going to duplicate it, name this normal. Filter, 3D, generate normal map. Let's see. I think what they're seeing is just the shift of pixels because it's actually sharpening them. I don't see a color line anywhere. Maybe slightly in here because it's sharpening those lighter pixels, but that's nothing you can't adjust or you wouldn't be adjusting in Max anyways. That's like such a subtle effect. If they want to do another method, which is nearly the same thing, they can go to Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and you can adjust your values based off of what you're looking for. If you raise it really high, you'll see some changes in color. So I'm going to duplicate this, name it normal. I'm going to delete these other layers that I don't need. Filter, 3D, generate normal map. You have 3 levels to work with. It's kind of like the big, medium, and small levels of detail. I usually can tell what I'm looking at by looking at the map itself. If you prefer to use this interface, you can. You have some different tools up here that are really useful. My favorite is actually being able to just move in closer. So I want to slide the 3D camera closer to my object. And you can do panning and everything else just like in Max, but you actually have to select the individual tools. We don't need to go crazy with this, but we can adjust like how blurry it is, how sharp it is. We can adjust the different levels of detail. Subtlety is key because we can always mix more into it later. I'm also going to duplicate this again and make a reflective map because this may come in handy. It's not necessarily dedicated to reflection, but it could be used for displacement. It could be used as a bump if the normal wasn't working out. It could be used as a number of things. It's just a black and white, higher contrast version of the same texture. If you're working quickly and you're already in Max and you don't want to go into Photoshop, that's where you can use monochrome. But since we're in here making the different maps anyways, we might as well just create this now and not have to worry about color correct nodes later.
Những cái việc này hoàn toàn có thể làm được trong cái market ở đây thì đã có sẵn công cụ để cứ làm luôn đây mà không phải lo về việc phải tạo một cái color correction nốt ở trong máy market.
So that's it. That's what I want to see for textures. I don't want to see, do I need to show you again? I don't want to see this. There's no point. You can easily move your UVs around to different parts of this massive texture sheet instead of having to worry about all these individual pieces with multiple materials. Create one material, maybe two.
Sau này thì bạn ý muốn mình là tạo một cái texture to, sau đấy mình di chuyển sang video thay vì tạo nhiều cái này thì nó bạn được sau này anh cứ bảo sau này tạo một hoặc hai thôi, đừng tạo quá nhiều này.
Okay. That's it. We're out of time. Any questions?
Ai có câu hỏi gì không?
We covered a lot today. Go play around with distance texture.